I just wanted to make this little video is why I don't trust the Russians. Actually, I think the Russian people are pretty crazy, hard-working people. Generally, they're good people, but why I don't trust the Russian leadership or anything coming out from the establishment main organs of their voice or whatever. This was a book written by Major Anatoliy Gollitsyn. I think he defected in 1961. He was the biggest, highest defector ever came out of the Soviet Union from up until that time. And he really opened up the eyes to, the establishment in the CIA in the United States at the time. Jim Angleton took him very seriously. You'll probably hear another name if you ever looked him up. Christopher Story, who was in the UK intelligence. I read this for a number of years. I mean, going back decades. So this is in my head. Major media in the United States doesn't pick this up at all. But I'm going to just cut right to the chase. I think there's a scam going on because there's one thing Golitsyn said, that the whole idea is to modify communism with capitalism and introduce it to the West with a human face after the financial collapse of the West. In other words, people will turn to Russia as the world leader. In the West will do this. And I swear it seems to be playing out just like this. Now, I read these things 30 years ago. But I want to point out a couple cool things about this guy. You could say it's conspiracy theory, man. They have this is the only image I'm putting up here, so if you get bored with it, sorry, man. I'm not playing games with 50 million images and what's copyrighted or whatever. This is his book. Now, this book was actually published in 1984, years before the dissolution of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, solidarity in Poland, glasnost throughout Eastern Europe. None of that stuff occurred. Now, the book was published in 1984, but it was actually a series of memoranda to the CIA all through the 70s, and the last memoranda, the most recent one in the book, was in 1980. So he was writing this stuff about future events back in the 70s and up to 1980, published in 1984. But the events actually occurred years after that. And he did forecast about the reunification of Germany, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, solidarity in Poland, which was Lech Walesa. And I can go on a lot of garbage with this stuff. Also glasnost, new awakening, new opening in Eastern Europe. There's a lot of indications that this was all planned because a lot of the guys that were former communists just changed their tune and says, "Oh, we're capitalists now." And I got some other videos on there you can look up about Georgia Guidestones and how that ties into some other things. Well, it's like a lot of this stuff was well planned ahead of time. It wasn't haphazard. There was no surprise. Gorbachev was already given the keys to the Presidio over in San Francisco, which was a very old established naval facility going back before the United States even existed. Except they didn't call it the Gorbachev Foundation at the time. They think they named it after some mountains or something. So all this stuff was actually planned well ahead of time, was coordinated with the West and Russia. But Golitsyn says that the West doesn't know what the hell they're dealing with. He's got a very different view from being inside the KGB. Now, there's a couple other KGB people that defected after him. They're much higher ranked than him. I think there was a general, or both of them were generals, and he used to refer to them as the two Olegs because they both had Oleg in their name. I'm just doing this from memory. But they used to be around talking to college students around his circuit, getting paid big bucks by some foundations, the big money, Western money foundations. These two KGB defectors that were higher ranking than Golitsyn, being paid big bucks to go around college circuits and talk about different things, and students would answer them questions, they ask them dumb questions and stuff. But they were getting paid by American, non-governmental organizations, large foundations. Whereas Golitsyn, he was a U.S. citizen, but he had to be in hiding in the U.K. He couldn't go out and make public speeches. They'd kill him. He was afraid for his life. But he was working with different people in the intelligence community, both in the United States and in the U.K. Now, this book was not some big bestseller, but a lot of things in it were confirmed. I don't consider it conspiracy theory. It's like, hey, he nailed it. When he tells you a bunch of stuff ahead of time and it comes out right, the guy knows what he's talking about. But there's always one thing I keep thinking about. The Soviet Union, I call them that, they're really Russian Federation or whatever. Russian Federation, Soviet Union at the time, it was planning that what they're counting on, and maybe this is all coordinated with the West, I don't know, total financial collapse of the West. Now, when I was reading this stuff, I don't know, way back in the 80s, you know, it seemed kind of crazy. Total financial collapse. I'm thinking, you know, when's this going to happen? And here it is. It didn't happen. But they do very, very, very long-range planning. Now, my contention is, my belief is that this new global government garbage and all this financial system, it's all being coordinated between Russian leaders and Western leaders. But, just knowing human nature, one's going to want to be top dog despite the gentlemanly agreements behind the scenes. And, you know, even if it's written down on paper and they got an attorney saying with his rubber stamp, you know, that's the deal. It's a matter of force what comes into play. So somebody might stick somebody in the back. And I think that's what Golitsyn was talking about. So I never trust anything coming out of Russia. But I do know they got some serious, you know, you talk about organized crime in the United States. It's a joke and a half compared to what they got in Russia. I know we got the bankster elite and their crooks and everything like that. But, you know, I know this is just like rumor, but you can't prove it because they all get... It's more than likely true that Putin does have wealth beyond even Bill Gates. You really can't dig out the information, but when he threw out, you know, all the oligarchs and stuff like that in Russia, you know, playing a Christian card because he's throwing out the Jewish guys, right? That's what he was doing, supposedly. They were the bad guys. I don't think Putin's a Christian in any way. He's just a scam to appease the people in Russia, and I think some of the older people in Russia really realize it a lot better. But he's a very brutal dictator. I could read this. That's my opinion on this. I don't trust it. And there's a lot of, like, solid family connections. You even call it the family. Like you think the Italians are one way? Huh. The Russians are 100 times more worse. They're nuts. They're nuts. And I don't know. People, you know, the image being presented by, you know, the news agency Russia Today is they just flower over everything on Russia and they dig out every piece of dirt there is about the United States. I don't trust them for shit. But I just want to say this. I always have this in the back of my mind. The long-range plan was there was going to be total financial and economic collapse in the West. And then Russia, or Soviet Union at the time it was going to introduce a modified type of communism to the West with a human face. That almost smells like what's coming up. But, you know, I knew about this for decades, so... But, you know, it almost looks a little closer to the critical mass situation. Back in the 80s, it didn't look like it. You know, maybe you're thinking something going on with, you know... Maybe it was Jimmy Carter messing things up way back when. I don't know. And, you know, with the Iranian hostage crisis or whatever. Or you'd be thinking, you know... I was more of a fan of Ronald Reagan, but I realized that guy was a bunch of crap, and it was all showboating on the outside. And, you know, when Bill Clinton came in, you know, I'm more conservative, but I would think, gee, this is the communist garbage coming on then, because he gave a lot of technology to China, and a lot of things from Boeing were sold right to China, and a lot of things this guy did. He was bad news. I don't understand how that guy could have been president. So we got George Bush coming in after him, and he's Mr. CIA George Bush, and he was actually running Reagan. But I swear, I think about this Major Golitsyn all the time, and what he said, and how accurate he was, and how long range the plans are. Where he's probably lacking, I'm not an expert better than Major Golitsyn, but I think a lot of the intentions are to be coordinated between the West and the Russians, and that's the game. There's like there's a plan to actually bring about a world government, and a lot of the things with the Cold War and everything was a big show. But I never really have faith in gentlemanly agreements, because if one top dog can get over on the other top dog, they will. That's just human nature. And I think that's what Major Golitsyn's warning about. He says the West doesn't have any idea what they're dealing with. He may be right. But just going to go back and repeat that major point I made in the beginning, and I said it a couple of times. Major Golitsyn says that Russia, or Soviet Union, that wasn't what it was way back when, was basically going to do a restructuring, and it was basically a possum play. It was they get more technology from the West, more strength and know-how and all that type of stuff by being friends with the West than being foes. So that's why the whole Soviet Union came down. But I think it was in coordination with Western leaders. But he also stated that there's a planned, or they plan on, they think the Western economy is going to collapse. And at that time, communism is going to be introduced in the West with a human face. But I think it's actually, both sides are working together. But I do put a lot of faith in Major Golitsyn's warning about the West being very naive in what they're dealing with. And I actually see the American people don't actually see it all the way. Yeah, I know our Western leaders are evil as shit. We can actually stop them very easily. The Russians can't. Except nobody in the United States got the balls to stop their Western leaders. That's the problem. When anybody had the balls to stop them, they'd immediately be condemned by the lemmings, and life would go on like the lemming way it always was. But in the case of Russia, they got a real hard hammer over everybody else. Nobody's going to freaking look at what Putin does, or the people in the FSB. Nobody's going to look at that. So they got a hardcore organized crime unit in the Russian Federation today, and it far exceeds anything even in the West. So I trust nothing those guys say, nothing at all. They're garbage.